Hello, I'm Psychologist, and on this channel, we explore fictional technology horror stories that feel disturbingly close to reality. Tonight's story is about something that should be pure innocence: children creating art, exploring colors, expressing imagination. But what happens when a child's coloring book becomes a psychological surveillance tool? This is the story of Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist who discovered that digital coloring apps weren't just entertaining children, they were analyzing every drawing to create psychiatric profiles on kids as young as 3, then selling that data to schools, insurance companies, and government agencies. This story explores the terrifying possibility of childhood creativity being weaponized for commercial surveillance and how artistic expression can be turned into evidence against families. While completely fictional, it raises urgent questions about what data children's apps are really collecting and who's watching our children through their own artwork. Are you ready to question what your children's devices are analyzing? Let's begin. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been a child psychologist in Portland for 9 years. She'd worked with hundreds of families, helping children through developmental challenges, emotional difficulties, and family transitions. But in April 2024, she started seeing a pattern that made no professional sense. 5 families in 2 months, all suddenly under investigation by Child Protective Services. Not because of reported abuse, neglect, or concerning behavior observed by teachers or doctors. The investigations had been triggered by automated reports from children's apps. The first case was the Morrison family. Their 5-year-old daughter Lily used a popular digital coloring app called ArtMind Kids. One morning, CPS showed up at their door with a report stating that Lily's drawings showed indicators of emotional distress and potential unsafe home environment. What drawings? Mrs. Morrison asked Sarah during their emergency session. She colors princesses and rainbows. She's a happy child. Sarah reviewed the CPS report. It cited analysis by licensed psychological assessment software that identified concerning patterns including excessive use of dark colors, chaotic composition structures, and recurring imagery suggesting anxiety. Sarah requested to see Lily's actual drawings from the app. They were completely normal, typical 5-year-old art. A purple dragon, a brown dog, some flowers with faces. Nothing remotely concerning to any trained child psychologist. This assessment is nonsense, Sarah told the Morrisons. Whoever analyzed these drawings doesn't understand child development. 5-year-olds use whatever colors interest them. Chaotic composition is literally how young children draw. This isn't evidence of anything except normal childhood creativity. But CPS was treating the app's automated analysis as professional psychological assessment. The Morrisons were required to undergo family counseling, submit to home visits, and prove their home was safe, all because an algorithm had misinterpreted their daughter's innocent artwork. 2 weeks later, another family. The Chin family's 3-year-old son Marcus used DrawSmart Jr. CPS report. Repeated imagery of separation and isolation suggesting attachment disorder. Sarah looked at Marcus's drawings. He'd colored pictures of himself in his bedroom because that's where his toys were. The app had interpreted this as isolation imagery. He was 3 years old drawing his favorite place to play. Then the Torres family. Their 4-year-old daughter Sophia used ColorGenius Kids. CPS report. Aggressive color choices and disproportionate figure drawings indicating behavioral concerns. Sophia had colored a family portrait with everyone in different bright colors and made her little brother smaller than herself. Completely normal sibling dynamics and color exploration. But the app flagged it as problematic. By June, Sarah had 5 families dealing with invasive CPS investigations triggered entirely by automated analysis of children's digital coloring apps. She needed to understand what these apps were really doing. Sarah obtained copies of the 3 apps, ArtMind Kids, DrawSmart Jr., and ColorGenius Kids. She contacted Dr. Lisa Park, a data privacy researcher who specialized in children's technology. I need you to analyze these apps, Sarah told her. They're triggering child welfare investigations based on how toddlers color pictures. Something is very wrong. Dr. Park spent a week reverse engineering the apps. What she found was far worse than simple misinterpretation of children's art. Sarah, these apps are comprehensive child psychological profiling systems disguised as coloring books, Lisa explained, showing her analysis. Every drawing is analyzed by AI trained on clinical psychology literature. The apps assess color choices, pressure patterns from touch, time spent on different elements, symmetry, proportion, everything. She pulled up the technical documentation. They're generating full psychological profiles on children, assessing for anxiety, depression, aggression, attachment issues, developmental delays, even potential learning disabilities. And they're doing this on children as young as 2 years old based purely on coloring patterns. That's completely invalid, Sarah said. You can't diagnose psychological conditions from coloring alone, especially in young children. Development varies enormously. A 3-year-old's drawing style means nothing clinically. The AI doesn't know that. It was trained on research about art therapy and psychological assessment, but it can't distinguish between actual clinical indicators and normal childhood variation. It flags everything as potentially concerning because it's optimized for sensitivity, not accuracy. Lisa showed her where the data went. Every profile was uploaded to a central database operated by Child Insight Analytics, and then sold to multiple buyers. Schools purchasing early intervention indicators, insurance companies assessing behavioral health risks. Government agencies screening for at-risk children, marketing companies targeting parents of children with special needs. They're profiling millions of children without parental consent or professional oversight, Lisa said. And because the assessments are automated and use psychological terminology, they're being treated as legitimate professional evaluations. Sarah felt sick. How many children are in these databases? ArtMind Kids alone has 8 million users. ColorGenius has 6 million. DrawSmart Jr. has 4 million. We're talking about profiles on potentially 15 to 20 million children. Sarah and Lisa investigated Child Insight Analytics. The company had been founded by Dr. Marcus Brennan, a former child psychologist who'd lost his license after multiple ethics violations involving inappropriate psychological assessments. The business model was elegant in its exploitation: create free coloring apps for children, use AI to generate psychological profiles from their artwork, then sell those profiles as early identification data to anyone willing to pay. They discovered internal documents showing the company knew the assessments were unreliable. One memo stated, accuracy rate of 23% for actual psychological conditions, but sensitivity rate of 87% for flagging concerns creates high engagement from institutional buyers. Translation: the AI was wrong 77% of the time, but it flagged so many children as potentially problematic that schools and agencies felt they had to act on the reports. Another document revealed the company had partnered with CPS agencies in 6 states, providing free automated screening tools that were actually just feeding them the flagged profiles from children's coloring apps. They're creating false positives intentionally, Lisa explained. Every flagged child generates revenue, from the school that buys intervention data, from the insurance company adjusting premiums, from the marketing companies targeting the family. False positives are more profitable than accurate assessment. Sarah contacted the families to review what had been collected on their children. The profiles were horrifying in their presumptiveness. Lily Morrison, age 5, high anxiety indicators. Emotional regulation concerns. Recommend evaluation for anxiety disorder and family therapy assessment. Marcus Chen, age 3, attachment disorder markers. Social withdrawal patterns. Recommend developmental evaluation and parenting assessment. Sophia Torres, age 4, aggression indicators. Impulse control concerns. Recommend behavioral intervention and family counseling. These were normal, healthy children being labeled with psychiatric concerns based on how they chose colors in a digital coloring book. But the worst discovery was in the app's terms of service, buried in paragraph 53. By using this application, you consent to psychological and developmental assessment of child users and sharing of assessment results with educational institutions, healthcare providers, insurance companies, and government agencies for child welfare purposes. Most parents had never read it. They thought they were downloading a coloring book, not consenting to psychiatric evaluation and data sharing. Sarah worked with her affected families to document everything. They created detailed testimonials about how children's innocent artwork had been weaponized into psychiatric profiles, and how those profiles had triggered investigations and discrimination. "Mrs. Morrison, they told me my daughter's purple dragon meant she was anxious. She just likes purple. Now we have a CPS file that will follow our family forever, all because an algorithm misinterpreted a 5-year-old's color choice. Mr. Chen, my 3-year-old son was labeled with attachment disorder because he drew himself in his bedroom. He was drawing where his trains are. They treated normal toddler art like evidence of psychological damage." Dr. Lisa Park prepared technical documentation showing how the apps worked, how unreliable the assessments were, and where the data was being sold. They released everything simultaneously on social media, targeting parenting groups, child advocacy organizations, and privacy advocates. The response was immediate and explosive. Parents across the country started checking the apps their children used and discovering similar psychological profiling features. "My daughter's coloring app has been assessing her emotional development without telling me. I just read the terms of service. They've been sharing my 4-year-old psychological profile with our insurance company. The app flagged my son for aggression because he colored a superhero punching a villain. He's 6. That's normal play." Major media outlets picked up the story. Child development experts were horrified by the pseudoscientific assessments. Privacy advocates called it surveillance of childhood imagination. The American Psychological Association issued a statement: "Automated psychological assessment of children through artwork analysis, without proper clinical context and professional evaluation, is not valid and potentially harmful. These apps are misrepresenting the nature of psychological assessment." Class action lawsuits were filed representing 20 million families whose children had been profiled without informed consent. Child Insight Analytics initially defended their technology, but whistleblowers from inside the company started coming forward with devastating evidence. Emails showing executives knew the assessments were unreliable but prioritized profit over accuracy. Internal testing showing the AI flagged 67% of normal children as concerning, not because they had issues, but because false positives drove sales. Recordings of sales meetings where representatives told schools and agencies that early flagging creates intervention opportunities and demonstrates proactive child welfare commitment. Dr. Marcus Brennan and 4 Child Insight Analytics executives were arrested on charges of fraud, practicing psychology without a license, child privacy violations, and deceptive business practices. The trial revealed the full scope of the exploitation. Prosecutors showed that the company had deliberately designed the AI to overflag children because every false positive generated multiple revenue streams. These defendants didn't just create inaccurate psychological assessments, the prosecutor stated. They weaponized childhood creativity. They turned innocent drawings into psychiatric evidence. They labeled millions of normal children as problematic to profit from fear and institutional liability anxiety. Expert witnesses testified about the damage. Dr. Sarah Martinez explained how false psychiatric labels could follow children through their educational and medical records for years. A CPS supervisor testified that her agency had opened 847 investigations triggered by these apps, with 0 substantiated cases of actual abuse or neglect. A school psychologist described how children flagged by the apps were stigmatized and over-referred for services they didn't need. Parents testified about insurance premium increases, denied coverage, and invasive investigations, all based on how their toddlers colored pictures. Perhaps most damning, internal documents showed Child Insight Analytics had commissioned research showing their assessments were no more accurate than random chance, but they buried the study and continued marketing the technology as clinical-grade psychological screening. The jury convicted on all counts. Dr. Brennan received 8 years in prison. Other executives received 3 to 6 years. Child Insight Analytics was ordered to pay $6.2 billion in damages and permanently delete all collected profiles. But the damage couldn't be undone. 20 million children had been profiled, labeled, and flagged in databases that had been shared with countless institutions. Even with deletion orders, there was no way to fully remove the data from everywhere it had gone. The scandal exposed a disturbing trend in children's technology. Apps marketed as educational or entertaining were actually sophisticated data collection and profiling systems. Post-scandal investigations found similar practices in other children's apps. Learning games that assessed cognitive development and sold data to insurance companies, bedtime story, apps that analyzed speech patterns for developmental delays, educational drawing, apps that tracked fine motor skills and flagged children for special education assessment, emotion tracking, apps for children that shared mental health data with schools. The pattern was consistent: free apps for children that secretly extracted intimate developmental and psychological data to sell to institutions. Dr. Sarah Martinez testified before Congress on children's privacy and digital surveillance. What these companies did was exploit parental trust, she told the committee. Parents thought they were giving their children creative tools. Instead, they were subjecting them to unvalidated psychological evaluation. 3-year-olds were being labeled with psychiatric conditions by algorithms that couldn't distinguish between normal development and pathology. She continued, "The long-term impact is incalculable. How many children will carry false labels in their educational records? How many families face higher insurance premiums based on invalid assessments? How many children were over-referred for services they didn't need, creating unnecessary anxiety about normal development?" New regulations were enacted. Prohibition on psychological or developmental assessment of children under 13 without explicit parental consent and professional oversight requirement that any child assessment be conducted by licensed professionals, not automated systems. Criminal penalties for selling children's psychological or developmental data. Right for families to access and delete all collected data on their children. Mandatory disclosure of all data collection in children's apps. But enforcement remained challenging, and many companies simply moved operations overseas or restructured to technically comply while continuing invasive data practices. 1 year after exposing the scandal, Dr. Sarah Martinez sat in her office with the Morrison family. Lily, now 6, was drawing with actual crayons in an old-fashioned paper coloring book. "She won't use digital coloring apps anymore," Mrs. Morrison said. She says they're watching her draw. She's 6 years old and she's developed surveillance anxiety about creative expression. That was the hidden trauma of the scandal, not just the false profiles and invasive investigations, but the loss of innocence. Children who'd learned that their creativity could be used against them. Families who could never trust children's technology again. Sarah had spent the year helping families recover from the psychological impact of having their children's artwork weaponized. Some children had become anxious about drawing. Others had developed perfectionism, afraid to make art that might be flagged. Parents struggled with guilt over unknowingly subjecting their children to surveillance. "The worst part," Sarah reflected during an interview, "is that we stole something precious from these children. Drawing should be pure creative expression, no judgment, no assessment, no consequences. We turned it into evidence. We taught children that their imagination could be wrong." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Every parent wants to identify and address their child's needs early. That's natural and good. But these apps exploited that instinct. They created false concerns to profit from parental anxiety. They convinced institutions that algorithm-generated flags were professional assessments. And millions of children paid the price. The interviewer asked, "Are children's apps safer now?" Some are. Regulations helped. But parents need to be eternally vigilant. Read terms of service. Research data practices. Assume that if an app is free, your child is the product. And understand that no algorithm can replace professional human judgment about child development. Sarah looked at Lily, happily coloring with crayons, creating art that no one was analyzing, profiling, or selling. That's what childhood should be: freedom to create without surveillance, freedom to develop without being labeled, freedom to be imperfect without being flagged. We almost lost that. Some children still have. And we have to fight to protect it for the next generation. The ColorGenius case became a landmark in children's privacy law and developmental psychology ethics. It forced society to confront uncomfortable questions: how much surveillance of children is acceptable in the name of early identification? Who has the right to psychologically assess our children? And can childhood creativity survive in an age of constant digital analysis? Today, the profiles created by these apps have been legally deleted, but their impact remains. 20 million children were subjected to unvalidated psychological assessment. Thousands of families faced investigations, discrimination, and stigma based on how toddlers colored digital pictures. Dr. Sarah Martinez continues working as a child psychologist, but now also advocates for children's digital privacy rights. She screens every app recommended to her clients and educates parents about surveillance risks in children's technology. The lesson of the coloring apps that profile children, she tells parenting groups, is that we cannot trust companies to prioritize our children's well-being over profit. They will collect any data they can, analyze it in any way that generates revenue, and sell it to anyone willing to pay. Our children's development, their creativity, their innocent artwork, it's all just data to be monetized. She continues, as parents and professionals, we have to be the barrier between children and surveillance capitalism. We have to protect childhood as a space where children can explore, create, and develop without being constantly assessed, profiled, and commodified. The warning remains urgent because the threat persists. New children's apps constantly emerge with hidden data collection and analysis features. New companies promise early identification and developmental insights based on children's digital activities. The temptation to surveil, assess, and profile children continues because the data is so valuable. But the children deserve better. They deserve creativity without surveillance, development without premature labeling, and childhood without constant analysis. The smart coloring books tried to turn children's art into psychiatric profiles. They failed, but only because parents, professionals, and advocates fought back. The fight continues. Because in an age of surveillance capitalism, even a child's crayon choice can become a commodity. And protecting childhood means protecting it from those who would turn innocence into data. This story is completely fictional. ArtMind Kids, Draw Smart Jr., ColorGenius Kids, and Child Insight Analytics do not exist. Current children's coloring apps vary widely in their data practices and should be evaluated individually. However, the technology discussed is real. AI can analyze artwork, apps do collect data on children's activities, and automated systems increasingly make assessments about child development. The privacy and ethical implications of such surveillance are genuine concerns in child development and consumer protection discussions. This story is meant to encourage critical thinking about children's apps, what data they collect, and how that data might be used. Always read privacy policies, understand what you're consenting to, and remember that no app can replace professional human judgment about your child's development. Childhood creativity should be protected as a space free from surveillance and commercial exploitation. Thank you for watching.